The king, troubled by a persistent unrest in his kingdom, summoned the wise sage once more. "Great sage," he said, "my people grow anxious, and even my advisors are at a loss. Tell me, how can a ruler ensure lasting peace and prosperity?" The sage, whose eyes had seen the rise and fall of many realms, smiled gently. "Your Majesty, the answer lies not in gold nor in armies, but in understanding and fairness. A kingdom thrives when the ruler listens more than he commands, and when justice flows as naturally as the river to the sea." The king pondered these words, realizing that in his eagerness to show strength, he had overlooked the simple truths of compassion. "But how can I know if my decisions are just?" he asked. The sage took a small seed from his robe and held it out. "Plant this seed in the palace garden. Tend to it with care, water it, and watch it daily. If you nurture it without favor or fear, it will grow strong. So, too must your judgments. Treat them as you would the seed, and your kingdom will flourish." The king took the seed, humbled by the lesson, and returned to his garden. Each day he visited, he observed the small sprout grow into a mighty tree. And as the tree grew, so did his wisdom. He began to hold councils where every voice was heard, and he made decisions not from fear or pride, but from fairness. Years later, travelers from distant lands would speak of a kingdom where justice reigned, where the people smiled freely, and where the king's heart, once burdened by doubt, had learned the enduring truth. True power lies in wisdom, patience, and care. And in the palace garden, the tree still stood, a living reminder of the sage's lesson and the gentle strength of a wise ruler. Yet, not all were pleased. Some of the king's advisors, accustomed to wielding power behind the throne, grew jealous of the king's independence and wisdom. They whispered among themselves, plotting to return the kingdom to the old ways of fear and control. One evening, as the king wandered in his palace garden, reflecting beneath the great tree the sage had taught him to nurture, he noticed a shadow moving among the shrubs. From the darkness emerged an old woman, her robes tattered, yet her eyes shone with clarity. She bowed low before the king. "Your Majesty," she said, in a voice both gentle and firm, "I am but a messenger. Beware the counsel that comes cloaked in flattery. There are those who would use your wisdom to serve their ambition, not the people's well-being." The king thanked the woman, though he could not see who she was. That night he called upon the sage. "Wise one," he said, "my kingdom grows strong, but I fear treachery hides even among my closest advisors. How can I protect the people and uphold justice without turning suspicion into tyranny?" The sage stroked his long beard and replied, "True vigilance is not found in spying or punishing, but in understanding the hearts of men. Test them, yes, but with fairness. Give them a task that reflects their character, and observe whether they serve for gain or for the good of all. The truth will always reveal itself in actions, not words." Heeding the sage's advice, the king devised a plan. He summoned the advisors and assigned each a responsibility crucial to the welfare of the kingdom. One was to oversee the harvest, another the marketplace, another the guards of the city gates. And he himself, unbeknownst to them, observed their actions carefully. Weeks passed, and the results were telling. Some advisors worked diligently, ensuring the people's needs were met, while others plotted shortcuts and deceit, thinking the king too wise to notice. When the evidence was clear, the king acted not with anger, but with justice. He removed those whose intentions were selfish and honored those who served faithfully. The people, witnessing their king's fairness and wisdom, grew even more devoted. They sang songs of the ruler who listened, the ruler who nurtured the kingdom like the tree in the garden. And in that tree, the king often sat, contemplating not power but responsibility, and the delicate balance between strength and compassion. Years later, when travelers came from distant lands, they spoke not only of the prosperity of the kingdom, but of the story of the king and the wise sage, a tale that reminded all who heard it that true leadership is rooted in patience, observation, and an unwavering commitment to justice. And the sage, now very old, would smile quietly whenever he visited. knowing that the seed he had given the king had grown not only into a mighty tree, but into a legacy of wisdom that would endure for generations. One crisp morning, as the king walked beneath the great tree in the palace garden, a messenger arrived in haste. "Your Majesty," he cried, "a great army approaches from the north. They burn villages and enslave those who resist. Your people are in grave danger." The king's heart sank. Though his kingdom had prospered, he knew that wisdom alone could not stop swords and fire. He summoned the sage immediately. "Wise one," the king said, his voice tight with concern, "how can I protect my people from an enemy so strong? I have ruled with justice and care, yet my strength feels insufficient." The sage, calm as always, placed a hand on the king's shoulder. "Strength alone wins battles, yes, but a kingdom is preserved by more than armies. You must consider both the sword and the mind. There is always a path where wisdom can protect what force cannot." The king furrowed his brow. "But what path is that?" The sage smiled, revealing a glimmer of mischief in his aged eyes. "Go to the enemy, not as a ruler to fight, but as a man who understands fear and desire. Learn what drives them, and you may turn their purpose without spilling blood. But beware, courage alone will not suffice. You must also act with patience and cunning." Trusting the sage, the king disguised himself and traveled to the northern border with only a few loyal companions. They found the enemy camp, and under the cover of night, the king observed. He saw not monsters, but men and women weary from war, driven by hunger and promises of gold. Their commander, a stern general, spoke of lands to seize and riches to claim. Yet he too worried for the lives of his soldiers. The king waited for the right moment and then approached the general, offering a truce and words of understanding. "I see your suffering and the burdens you carry," the king said. "But there is another way. Help my people, and I will ensure you and your army are fed and honored without unnecessary bloodshed." The general, wary at first, hesitated. The king spoke with sincerity, revealing plans to share food, resources, and work between their lands. Slowly, the general realized that the path of peace offered security for his people and wealth without endless destruction. By the time the sun rose, the enemy army had withdrawn, not defeated by force, but convinced by wisdom and fairness. The king returned to his kingdom, weary yet triumphant. The people cheered not only for the preservation of their homes, but for the courage and intelligence of their ruler. The sage, awaiting him in the palace garden, nodded with quiet approval. "You have learned, Your Majesty, that true power lies not in the sword or in fear, but in understanding, compassion, and the courage to act wisely when danger threatens." And so the kingdom endured, stronger than ever, a land where justice, wisdom, and courage walked hand in hand. And the great tree in the garden, witness to the king's growth, stood taller than ever, a living testament to the enduring power of knowledge and patience. Months passed, and the kingdom thrived. Yet peace often invites hidden trials. One evening, as the king walked through the bustling marketplace, he noticed whispers and uneasy glances. A merchant approached him nervously. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, "strange happenings trouble the townsfolk. Goods vanish, messages are stolen, and no one knows why. Some fear a curse, others say it is the work of spies." The king's brow furrowed. Though his enemies had been turned by wisdom, he knew that threats could arise from within. He called for the sage, "Wise one," the king said, "my people are troubled by forces unseen. How can I protect my kingdom when danger hides in shadows, even among friends?" The sage, whose eyes had grown sharper with age, replied, "The greatest danger to a kingdom often comes from within. Observe carefully, listen with patience, and remember that truth is revealed not in words, but in deeds. Trust is a garden, it must be nurtured, yet watched closely, lest weeds grow among the flowers." Following the sage's counsel, the king disguised himself and mingled among the townsfolk. He watched carefully as merchants traded, as guards patrolled, as villagers went about their daily lives. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Certain messages disappeared when handled by a seemingly loyal official, and supplies vanished when entrusted to a particular guard. The king confronted them, not with anger, but with reason. I give you the chance to speak truthfully, he said. Why betray the kingdom you swore to protect? The official, shamed and fearful, admitted that he had been tempted by a distant ruler who promised gold in exchange for secrets. The guard, seeing the king's fairness, confessed his part as well, realizing that loyalty and honor mattered more than fleeting riches instead of punishment alone. The king offered a chance for redemption. Both men were to work together, restoring the stolen goods and serving the people they had wronged. Under the king's guidance, they learned that true power lies not in deceit, but in service and integrity. The people, witnessing their ruler's wisdom and fairness, grew even more devoted. The kingdom flourished, and the tree in the palace garden grew taller, its roots deep and strong, a mirror of the king's own understanding and steadfastness. Yet the sage, sitting beneath the tree, warned quietly, "Your wisdom grows. But remember, life will always bring challenges that cannot be solved by courage or fairness alone. There will be choices that test your heart, your patience, and the very values upon which your kingdom stands. Prepare yourself, your majesty, for the true test may come when you least expect it." And the king, gazing at the stars above the garden, understood that his journey was far from over. The path of a wise ruler is never finished. It is a continuous trial of courage, justice, and understanding. One quiet night, as the king sat beneath the great tree in the palace garden, a strange figure appeared in the moonlight. Cloaked in shadow, the figure spoke in a voice both chilling and soft. "King of this land, I bring a challenge that no army or council can resolve. A darkness moves through your kingdom, unseen and unmeasured, and it will consume all if not met with wisdom beyond mere fairness." The king rose, his heart steady but cautious. "Who are you, and what darkness do you speak of?" The figure lifted its hood, revealing the face of a young woman with eyes as deep and shifting as storm clouds. "I am the keeper of choices," she said. "I test rulers, not with war, but with the weight of decisions that shape hearts and destinies. Within 3 days, your kingdom will face a trial unlike any before. You must decide who lives, who suffers, and who thrives not by law, but by insight and understanding. Fail, and all you have built will crumble." The king felt a chill run through him. Never before had a threat required such judgment. He sought the sage immediately. "Wise one," the king said, "a trial comes that tests not armies or riches, but my heart. How can I possibly choose between lives and fates?" The sage, calm as ever, replied, "True wisdom is not in avoiding difficult choices, but in seeing clearly the consequences of each path and acting with both courage and compassion. Listen to your people, understand their needs. And remember, mercy can be as powerful as justice. And sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest truth." The next morning, the kingdom awoke to chaos. A river had swollen from the mountains, threatening to flood the eastern villages. A fire had broken out in the marketplace, and rumors spread that a neighboring kingdom sought to claim the borderlands. In the confusion, the king's decisions now had immediate, tangible consequences. He called his council, but no answer felt sufficient. Remembering the sage's advice, he walked among the people, listening and observing. He spoke to farmers whose homes were at risk, merchants whose livelihoods were threatened, and guards who feared the approaching neighbors. He saw fear, hope, and courage in equal measure. With careful judgment, he devised a plan. Villagers would be evacuated to higher ground. The marketplace fire would be contained by organizing townsfolk and soldiers together, and emissaries would be sent to the neighboring kingdom to negotiate while showing strength in unity. Every action required trust, wisdom, and courage. By the 3rd day, the crises were resolved, the flood waters were diverted, the fire extinguished, and the neighboring kingdom's forces stood down. Impressed by the king's leadership and the loyalty of his people, the keeper of choices appeared once more, her stormy eyes softening. "You have passed the trial, king," she said. "Your wisdom is not measured by the ease of your reign, but by how you face the impossible. Remember this, leadership is a living test, ever-changing, and only those who act with both heart and mind endure." The king, exhausted but enlightened, returned to the palace garden. The sage was waiting, smiling quietly. "You see, Your Majesty," he said, "the true measure of a ruler is not in avoiding difficulty, but in guiding others through it with fairness, courage, and understanding. And the tree you tend, it will always remind you that patience and care create strength that endures even the darkest storms, and so." The kingdom prospered, tempered by challenges, guided by wisdom, and protected not only by swords, but by the steady heart and discerning mind of a king who had learned to truly lead. Months after the keeper of choices had left, the kingdom remained peaceful. Yet the sage, ever watchful, sensed a new trial approaching, one that would strike not at the kingdom, but at the king himself. One morning, a mysterious envoy arrived bearing a sealed letter. Its wax emblem was unfamiliar, and the message inside was simple but chilling: "A shadow walks among your council. Betrayal comes not from strangers, but from those you trust. Choose wisely, for one false step will destroy all you love." The king felt a deep unease. He called his advisors together, but no one would confess or reveal the source. The sage, sitting quietly beside him, said, "Your Majesty, the greatest trials often come not from outside, but from within. Watch carefully, but judge with wisdom. Truth cannot be forced. It must be revealed by actions." Over the following weeks, the king observed closely. He watched how each advisor handled challenges, the distribution of resources to the flood-affected villages, the management of trade and taxes, and even how they spoke in private councils. Subtle signs appeared: hesitation, secretive glances, unusual alliances. At last, the truth emerged. One advisor, trusted above all, had been plotting with a rival kingdom, seeking to overthrow the king and claim the throne. But instead of immediate punishment, the king remembered the sage's words: "Wisdom and mercy often yield strength greater than fear or retribution." He devised a clever plan. The advisor was confronted, not with anger, but with evidence, and given a choice: face exile and loss, or serve the kingdom faithfully under careful watch to atone for his betrayal. The advisor, humbled and fearing for his own legacy, chose redemption and pledged loyalty anew. Yet the challenge was not over. The rival kingdom, sensing weakness, sent envoys to test the king further. This time, they offered wealth and lands in exchange for alliance, but also demanded control over parts of the king's realm. The decision weighed heavily: accept and gain riches, or refuse and risk war. The king consulted the sage one last time. "Wise one, my people's safety is my greatest duty. How can I choose between greed and risk, between temptation and loyalty?" The sage placed his hand on the king's shoulder. "A ruler's true strength lies not in wealth, but in integrity. Stand for what is right, even if it costs you dearly. The people will follow the heart of their leader, and that loyalty is worth more than gold or land." With courage and clarity, the king refused the rival kingdom's offer. He sent emissaries not to threaten, but to negotiate peace and mutual respect. The rival rulers, seeing a king guided by wisdom and unyielding integrity, withdrew their demands and agreed to a treaty securing lasting peace. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished like never before. The tree in the palace garden, once a small seed, now towered over the land. Its roots deep and its branches wide, a living symbol of the king's patience, courage, and enduring wisdom. The sage, his life nearing its end, smiled as he watched the king walk beneath the tree. "You have done well, Your Majesty. You have faced temptation, betrayal, danger, and moral trials. You have ruled not by fear, nor by force, but by wisdom, patience, and heart. The kingdom is safe, and your legacy will endure." Years turned into decades, and the king grew old. His hair, once dark, had turned silver, and his steps, once swift, had slowed. Yet his eyes remained bright with the wisdom of a lifetime, and his heart still beat with care for the people he had served so faithfully. The kingdom, now prosperous beyond imagination, had become a beacon of justice, peace, and learning. Scholars traveled from distant lands to study its libraries, farmers perfected their crops, and towns flourished with markets filled with laughter and trade. The people often spoke of the king not as a distant ruler, but as a guide whose wisdom had shaped their lives. The great tree in the palace garden, planted long ago from a tiny seed given by the sage, had grown into a magnificent canopy that shaded the palace and the city beyond. Children played beneath its branches, lovers rested in its shade, and travelers marveled at its size. Many whispered that the tree held a part of the king's spirit, the patience, courage, and compassion he had cultivated through his life. One morning, the king walked beneath the tree with his grandchildren, recounting stories of his youth, the sage's teachings, and the trials he had faced. "Remember this," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. "True strength lies not in power, nor in fear, nor in riches. True strength is in wisdom, in understanding, and in the choices we make for the good of others." His grandchildren listened intently, eyes wide with wonder, and one asked, "Grandfather, will the kingdom always be safe?" The king smiled, placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "No kingdom is ever without challenge. But if leaders act with courage, fairness, and care, their people will endure. And if you learn the lessons of patience, mercy, and wisdom, you can face any trial that comes your way." The sage, long gone from the world of men, lived on in the hearts of those who remembered him. His teachings, planted like seeds in the king's mind, had grown into a legacy that would shape generations. The people of the kingdom carried forward his lessons: to listen before judging, to act with fairness, and to remember that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of history. And so, the kingdom endured through centuries of change, storms, and challenges, remembered not for battles won with swords, but for a ruler who ruled with wisdom and a sage whose guidance had planted a seed that grew into greatness. The great tree remained, a living monument of patience, courage, and wisdom, reminding all who passed beneath its branches that the heart of a just ruler could shape the world for generations to come. The king sat beneath the great tree one last time, feeling the weight of years and the gentle sway of the branches above. Closing his eyes, he spoke softly, as if sharing his thoughts with the wind, the people, and the generations yet to come. "I have walked the path of kings, through storms and shadow, through fire and fear. I have learned that strength is not in the crown I wear, nor in the army's the first command, but in the hearts I touch, the minds I guide, the choices I make with care. I have seen betrayal and temptation, and I have seen courage bloom where none expected. I have learned that mercy is not weakness, and that wisdom is the seed from which peace grows. This kingdom, these people, this land I love, they are my true treasure, more lasting than gold, more enduring than stone. And if one day I am gone, let them remember this: a ruler who listens, who understands, who acts with both heart and mind, can shape a world that survives even the darkest storms." As the king opened his eyes, sunlight filtered through the branches, casting dancing patterns on the ground. The leaves rustled in a gentle breeze, as if echoing his words. He smiled, knowing the kingdom he had nurtured would continue to thrive, not because of him alone, but because wisdom, courage, and care had been planted deep in the hearts of all who lived there. And so, the story of the king and the wise sage became legend. Travelers spoke of it in distant lands, children learned it as a fable, and the great tree in the palace garden stood tall through centuries, a living reminder that patience, understanding, and the courage to act justly are the roots of a lasting legacy. The kingdom endured, the people prospered, and the lessons of a wise ruler passed through generations, whispered in the wind and etched forever in the hearts of those who chose to lead with both mind and heart.